आप सबको मेरा नमस्कार. That attempt to wake everyone up, I guess, was not enough. Namaskar. I'm sure we can do better than that. Namaskar. Thank you so much. I'd like to start by thanking you for that wonderful intro. Wish I could take you around everywhere, both of you, especially when I have the post-lunch sessions. So thanks very much for that. I'd like to, in particular, thank Mr. Gupta, Mr. Gautam, Commander Kataria, Mr. Bhupendra Singh, Ms. Neetu Sharma, especially for the patience that Mr. Singh and Ms. Neetu have had. Catching me is not that easy. And Mr. Suranjan for the very warm welcome, and Mr. Roger for making this happen for me. And I'm hoping my session will inspire many more of you to perhaps have me in your organizations. And let me tell you, I don't come for free. There's a speaker fee, which is how I have raised funds for the little work that we do in the village. But that's not what I'm here for. You don't have to call me. The main reason that I'm here, of course, upon the invitation from PMAI, but primarily to inspire many more like us to come forward to help take the journey of our country forward in a far more efficient manner than we have seen in the past many decades. I do believe there's huge potential, which I'm hoping all of you believe in as well. Given the sectors that you come from, there's enough disruption that we're seeing in businesses, in the private sector, at very many levels. But there's a larger portion of India, as we all know, that lags way, way behind. And if you're looking at being part of the global phenomena of moving ahead and making that disruptive force work for us, then I believe that each one of us has to participate far more than we are doing at the moment. And in that aspect is where I would like to share my personal journey with you in the village that I'm hoping would make many more of us aware of what the grassroots conditions are. Yes, media writes a lot about it. Yes, we have the government that speaks a lot about it. But not every village gets to benefit from what the government has to offer. Not every village gets to benefit from the intervention of the private sector, and we all are fully aware of it. But I guess where we sometimes miss out is on the fact that we are, even if for those of us living in cities, in far more privileged backgrounds, with the basic amenities that we tend to take for granted, we have to realize that even if you just want to think about yourself or your own family or your own organization, there's a direct impact if we do not take care of our fellow citizens living in villages. And I'm very proud to share that I'm a villager myself, hailing from the very village that I'm serving at the moment, which is called Soda. That should be an easy brand recall. Yes, how many of you drink? Well, thank you very much. And thanks again for having me here. So my journey actually began in 2010. Of course, courtesy the reserved seat for women. If it weren't the case, I'm not so sure if my village residents would have really thought of me. That's what I usually tell them. So the idea to become a sarpanch, frankly, was not that of mine. It was that of the village residents, because they were fed up of not really seeing development happening. It had happened in the past. Some of you may have read my profile. Yes, my grandfather was pulled into the village, back into the village in the same manner that I was, but that was way back in post-75. I think it was probably in 76 that he was pulled back after he retired from the army as a highly decorated soldier. He was, he is the receiver of the Chhavi Chakra Award, also called the Savior of Punjab for his exemplary act in defending our country. And, but anyway, that's not the story I really want to share. So, but because of that, he had met the then president, the prime minister, the chief minister, and the village residents had been very, very smart to realize that that is something they could harness upon. And my grandfather tells me that when he was appointed sarpanch, way back then, there really wasn't much funding through the government for rural development. But because of his connection and because of the highly decorated soldier that he was able to harness those connections and make some development happen in the village. But between him and me, there's a gap of 20 years. So it's not like I've just taken over from my own family. During that time, other people from within the village became sarpanches. And in 2009, what I noticed, and I've been going to my village literally from when I was born, and I noticed that instead of things improving, while the government had increased the funding for rural development, but things had only become from bad to worse. And being in Rajasthan, in an area which on and off does suffer from a huge drought, 2009 was the worst time, where a lot of our cattle was dying, and we didn't have safe drinking water available. And to make matters worse, I noticed that a lot of people, a lot of residents in the village had been affected by Down syndrome. And my limited research online made me realize that intake of contaminated water starts affecting a child while the child is in the mother's womb. But no research as such has been done to really check which areas really have that level of contamination which can lead to Down syndrome. So when we're looking at India ahead, we have to realize that it's important that we build upon our human capital. And unfortunately, that does not happen because people are not willing to go to villages, not just to check on health, which remains globally the foremost aspect that receives maximum intervention. But again, when we look at India, it is not enough. There's a lot more that needs to happen. So in my area, the additional challenge is that all groundwater has been declared unsafe, even for the purpose of irrigation, owing to high levels of contamination and salinity. So come summers, or when we run out of the surface water, because we're totally dependent on rainfall, we have no choice but to consume the contaminated and saline groundwater. So much so that if we were ever to come into the village during such time, if someone offers you a cup of tea, which are kind of small, but you would think that in that tiny cup, the person has probably thrown in at least 5 teaspoons of salt. So that's the level of salinity that we have. There's a lot of land which cannot be cultivated because of that high level of salinity, and that is very visible in the whiteness that you see on the surface of the soil. But that is not the challenge just my village alone. That is a challenge across many pockets across the country. But again, not enough is happening. What do the farmers do when it is a completely agrarian economy? So from the time when I was little to now, I have noticed that cattle or animal that people used to have has reduced by almost 75% because of lack of water and lack of fodder. So is that really the kind of environment we want to provide for our fellow citizens? If we are looking at filling our stomach through the vegetables and the grains that are made available to us, but we do not give back to the society that cultivates that for us, what good and what justice are we really doing is the question that I'd like to put forth to you. And to fix that, and I do know that I can't alone do it, I decided that I'm going to agree to the request of the village residents and come forward to help. Not because I want to get into politics or that I want to earn a name and fame, but because I believe that people like us need to come together. So my vision really has been to connect the dots, bring people from different sectors with different expertise, and jointly work towards bringing about an integrated development within the village. Not because this is my village, but I believe if in all these decades our government has not been able to be successful in creating that model village in the true sense, what is it that really stops us from coming together to do so? And even if it's one village at a time, it's about time we started somewhere. So with that vision is how I have been slowly working in the village. And yes, while my tenure ends in 2020, February 2020 is when my second term will end, I do have the dream still alive to continue doing the work in the village and hopefully garner that support. And I'm hoping that in this audience, there will be some of you who would come forward to help and help scale it up gradually, even if it's one village at a time. And the beauty of doing so is that when we're working, and I'm sure some of you would have already worked at the grassroots, directly or indirectly, you will always find champions. And I believe if we can empower people, especially the youth, channelize their energies and creativity in the right direction, they would be the champions who would willingly be able to carry the work forward and take it to the next village and the next, and create that ripple effect, develop many more villages across the country, and thereby make India, or get India up there so that we can meet and be at par at as many other countries, and be able to take the country forward in very many aspects. We have it all. But I think what happens is that we often worry about how I, as an individual, or as one representing one individual organization, how much of a difference can I really make? But we have to realize, cliched as it may sound, boon boon se ghada bharta hai. Every drop of water counts. And at the same time, if you look at a drop of water falling consistently at the same spot, does not even need to happen every day. It can happen once in a week, once in 10 days. But when that drop of water falls at the same spot, that individual drop alone, or the multiple drops that fall consistently, has the potential and the power to mold and soften the hardest rock. And that is the potential of every individual or an individual organization. And that is something that we should not belittle or question. So what we've really been able to do in my village, yes, there is funding available, but the processes at the grassroots are not that easy. We often don't know what kind of budgets are made available to us at the panchayat level. We don't know who to reach out to and how to go about it. And that is the condition of the many villages across the country, barring maybe a few states which have taken made the effort and taken the initiative to empower the grassroots, especially at the panchayat level, elected representatives and secretaries. But it doesn't always happen. A lot of it, as we know, remains on paper. The decentralization of power hasn't quite really happened in many or majority of the states across the country. So much so, to put things in perspective, panchayats are not really entitled to use the funds we receive at our own discretion. We're dependent on the district headquarters to decide which of the projects that we list down should be sanctioned. And even if we tell them that these are the projects we want done or sanctioned on priority, it does not necessarily mean that the district headquarters or people sitting there would necessarily do so. And that is what I noticed in my own panchayat. While the government was aware that there was a drought, and a severe drought that we had seen in 2009, where cattle was dying, yet when we listed down our projects, I took a step further, listed them down on basis of priority, went to the government officials at the block level, at the district headquarter level, requested them to sanction our water-related projects first, because that was the need of the hour. Yet what they sanctioned was an Anganbadi, which was not the need of the hour. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because we are so used to a very top-down approach that we take it for granted that people in villages do not know what they want, which is not true. There's enough wisdom, and you don't need degrees to have that wisdom. You do not necessarily need degrees to become a smart individual, to understand certain basic requirements and the challenges that exist. And those who live in villages also know what the solutions are. The ideas may need to be tweaked. And that is how we are trying to do the development work in the village. So when I ran Pillar to Post, reached the central government, the state, I realized that we really didn't have funds to desilt our existing reservoir. I reached out to a few private sector companies as well, and PSUs. But because my district unfortunately did not and does not really have any industries within the district, many of them turned around and said, we can't help you because you're not in close proximity to a plant or unit. And that made me realize that how disconnected we really are. While there are many of us, and I'm saying us because I have worked in the private sector as well, while They're companies which provide services and products to the rural sector. But when it comes to giving back, many pull themselves back. And the question which I put forth to you is that fair? When you're eating into the already limited pockets of the rural sector, why is it that we cannot think about empowering those very individuals, help them rise above where they are at, and involve them in that progress or step forward for development? And I think that is something we all need to think about. What makes us different? What makes us human? That is the question that I put forth to you. I think we often forget, when we get caught up in the rat race, we forget what it is that we're actually there for. Why is it that we are privileged? Is it just so that we can fill our own pockets more? Or can we understand that emotion of humanitarianism and also think about others? Because I think there's immense beauty in doing that. So while my challenge still existed about how to raise funds, and I think that was the only time that I really was disheartened, but I was lucky enough, and I am lucky to have the kind of parents that I have, who support me all the way through. And my dad realized that I was lost and disheartened, so he said, don't worry. Even if it means I have to sell all the assets that I have, I will do so, but you stay focused on the project you have decided to do. And I will help you. And that's when I realized, while I'm running Pillar to Post, why don't I just look within my own network of friends and family and not just burden my dad alone? So I reached out to a few of his friends, and 4 of his friends came forward to help. And we have a small hotel in Jaipur, so of course I exhausted the funds from our own little hotel. And with that, we were able to raise, in a span of, I'm not exaggerating, 7 to maximum 10 days, I was able to raise 20 lakhs of rupees. And of course, family and friends always come to help. But what was really motivating for me at that point of time was that this young entrepreneur named Vandana Singh from Delhi, at that point of time only 28 years old, who heard an interview of mine on FM while she was on the highway in a taxi. Without doing any due diligence, she sent me a check of 50,000, which went into that pool of 20 lakhs. And with that, we desilted the reservoir, which looked like this. As you can see, there was a lot of silt that accumulated over the years, and we needed machinery. So while, as you noticed in the previous slide, we actually got the entire village involved within the first week of my coming into office, where people did Shramdan, voluntary service, to manually desilt the reservoir. But given the expanse of the reservoir, which covers an area of 100 acres, the government engineers said you would not be able to fulfill your project even in a span of 10 years because of the amount of silt that needed to be dug out and the wide expanse of the reservoir. And that's why we needed machineries, which unfortunately, even in the 21st century, at least in our state, you're not allowed to use machinery for rural development, which I think is rather unfortunate. But I'm hoping when people like you and I start asking and demanding the government to make the change will happen. But we need to step up and ask those relevant questions and make those necessary demands. So with that 20 acres, we were able to desilt 10 acres of the reservoir. Thank you. And luckily, the rain gods were kind. So in 2010, we had amazing monsoon. And with the very first shower, the reservoir had filled up. But that is not the condition today. Unfortunately, this monsoon and the previous monsoons weren't that good. So my reservoir at the moment does not look like as it does in this photo. So we have to find more relevant solutions. I unfortunately don't have the expertise. I'm not a water expert. I'm not an engineer. And that is why that vision that I have of getting people with the different expertise from different sectors, it is important that we come together to change the face of India. Because unless until we don't come together, it will be rather late. And we can even lose out on developing the nation in the right manner. The reason I say that is because the very basics in villages are not available. So the funding that did come into our kitty, when I say kitty, I'm talking about what comes into the account of the panchayat, which from 2010 That time it was about 20 lakhs per annum for a population of about 7,500 people. And as of today, it has increased to approximately, say, 40, 45 lakhs per annum. So as you can see, it's not very much. And again, we're bound by the guidelines set by the government, which means the different schemes that the funding comes through, it can only be used for that specific project. And I hate to share this, but Tonk, the district that my village falls in, had been declared as a backward district or an underdeveloped district. So we got an additional funding called Backward Regional Grant Fund, with which we were able to construct the roads, internal roads within the village, because of which we were able to build the basic infrastructure. And that is what I focused on during the first term, after asking the villagers what their priorities really were. The main priorities they highlighted were water, obviously, roads, and electricity. And that is what we started with. And the reason I'm sharing this is because it's important to understand what people want and address that. When you're able to do that, and luckily for me, yes, it's a patriarchal society, and yes, there are certain questions that are put forth, especially to a system that is not used to, one, a person younger than them, questioning them, sitting across the table, and on top of that, a woman who they're not used to, because they're used to generally somebody of the same gender sitting across the table and asking them questions or working with them. But I often believe that when you're focused on your work or your target, and you just get down to doing the work diligently, your work eventually speaks for itself. And this is very interesting because when the villagers came to me, and they were all men who had come to me, requesting me to become the sarpanch. And so I did ask them, my question to them was, how am I going to balance? Because my parents have the small 25-room property in the city. I was still in the private sector and looking at transitioning into taking over the hotel from my parents and running it for them. Parallelly, I had started a horse riding academy in 2009. So that was still at its embryonic stage, needed a lot of attention. So my question to them was, how am I going to balance it? And they said, oh, you don't have to worry. Panchayat ki meeting, we have the meeting twice a month, and once a month there's a meeting at the block level. You just go, show your face at these meetings, and we will take care of the rest. And I said, that's not going to happen. Because if I commit, then it's going to be 100% and more. And they thought, bachi hai, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But luckily, because I was able to deliver within the first 6 months of coming into office, they realized that I meant exactly what I said, and that I would not be biased, because I also told them, I understand that normally when somebody votes for you, they think that because they voted for you, you have to protect them. And I said I would, but if I find out that you've done something wrong, and I started by saying that even if I find out that my own family has encroached into a territory that doesn't belong to us, that will be the first wall that I will break. They didn't believe me. But I think the work spoke for itself, and the faith that I was able to generate through that is something that has helped me go a long way. And I think it's because of that that I got re-elected again in 2015 when it was a journal seat, when there were 3 men against me. In fact, I had not even nominated my name. The villagers said, you have to come and run for elections again. And I'm very happy to share that I didn't have to spend money the first term, nor the second term in the campaign. The villagers kept their word. They did the entire campaigning. The second time around, they only said that the few houses we would like for you to come and personally meet the people. And I think there were just 3 houses which I had to go to, where I didn't say I want you to vote for me. I actually got into an argument discussing what I thought development meant, and how we have to be far more inclusive, we have to get out of the caste system, and so on and so forth. And I actually was at loggerheads with one of them, but very interestingly, I think just my definition of development is something that appealed to them. And those who were resisting me were the ones who actually went out of the way to help in the campaign and make me win yet again, without having to spend a single rupee when I had 3 others who were trying to buy votes, giving alcohol, drugs, and so on and so forth to people. And the reason I'm sharing that is because for those who believe that corruption is the only way, I think my example tells you that no, we don't all have to succumb to it. Yes, it's difficult to stand tall against it, but if you decide to, and you're transparent, and are accountable, then people and forces will work with you. I know I don't have much time. Thank you. But getting back to the topic, I think what our country really needs is that participatory form of development, which requires for all sectors to come together and for us to stop pointing fingers at just the government and saying that it's the government's job. I think the government, while it has the intent, it fails in or lacks perhaps the management skills, which all of you seated here definitely have, which would be far more effective if we can come together and start participating in that role of development. And I think what really is needed when we're talking about developing the human capital is ensuring that the basic foundation of our education is made stronger. Of course, it should not be only informative, which is what we tend to see these days. There have to be other softer skills, values, which have to be introduced, which I think are missing. Information is something that smartphones provide to us, but is that what we want to depend on? Are those the kind of people we want to see shaping in our country? Anyone can get that information. So do we really need schools? If we need schools, I think we need to create good education systems, value-based education, ensuring that primary to mid education, school levels, is where attention needs to be paid. Because I believe that if a child learns and has that basic foundation set right, then he or she will be capable of learning in the future by one's own self. But at the moment, when we look in villages, if I look into my own village, the primary school education is beyond pathetic. A lot of children, and many of you must have read those surveys, when they come to the 8th grade, they still don't know how to read or write or do the simple mathematics. In addition to which, we have a government high school, we have teachers, but are those teachers held accountable? They often are not. Do they have the tools to teach the right things? They often are not. Becoming a teacher as of today is a job which people seek when they can't get through anywhere else. Everybody wants a government job in the village because it provides you the job security and a beautiful pension scheme. When they can't get through anywhere else is when they choose to become a teacher, which is unfortunate. So they, as it is, are not motivated. So how do we motivate them? Can we bring in apps? Right now we're talking about robotics, AI, VR, so on and so forth. Why is it that we cannot work upon bringing those aspects into the primary school education level to ensure that the basic foundation is provided for if people don't have the time to go to villages? I'm sure it can be done if you're talking about the future of India, how many ever years ahead you want to see it. Along with which, I think skilling India is also very, very important. There are many of you from different sectors who perhaps don't find people enough to fit in or fill in the vacancies that you have. What stops you from creating those skill sets? If not in rural spaces, start doing it in the urban spaces and gradually move into the rural sector. And again, I feel the government and we in the private sector need to also focus upon, if possible, creating short-term vocational training courses which are certified. Because within villages, again, if you look at the agrarian economy, if you can add value to the produce, if you can provide them processing units, they will be able to receive fairer prices and better prices for the produce that they're making as of today. And unfortunately, when I look into the agri sector, most farmers do not want their children becoming farmers because they do not see it as a viable source of income. I don't know how many of you know that for farmers, especially small and medium farmers, they suffer losses. A lot of large farm owners or landlords, unless they have the capacity to hold their produce and wait for the prices in the market to rise, they also suffer losses. But this is something we all are not aware of. So we need simple interventions at the moment. And if you look at technology, there's huge intervention happening globally, but our farmers in the rural sector are not able to access that. Can we come together to bring them that is the question. And along with that, okay, is it stuck? Yeah. So skill sets. I've also noticed that, and this again, most of you would know, many of you who are older than me would know, that there have been traditional arts and crafts, textiles, handicrafts, which you don't really see in the market today. You look at different states, stuff that the states were known for and popular for, have disappeared because that connectivity does not exist. People don't know how to sell their produce. People don't know how to do basic costing to make it sustainable. So can we introduce and inspire the government and motivate the government to also create units which will focus on bringing in the aspect of quality in these villages so that they can better their products, so that people like you and I will continue to buy it because of the quality rather than buying it once thinking I'm helping someone who's poor and not liking the product and choosing not to go and buy it again. We need to change that. We need to introduce e-commerce, which can be done easily. Along with which, I think we need to do ethical business. And not just business, we also need to think of our environment. We have to create products and services which will not be detrimental to the environment. And I don't think I need to say very much, especially for those of you who live in Delhi. Yes, Punjab, Haryana, farmers are often blamed for adding to the air pollution. But why is that? While we all know that there is the waste of the produce that is burnt, but there are many industries who could benefit from that waste. What stops us from giving them those ideas, providing them those units that could convert their waste and bring it to the very industries that could use it? And that's a very simple solution. But why is it that we don't think about it, and why is it that we don't work upon it? Yes, it is a broken structure. And I think one of the biggest things that poses hindrance to the development of the country is casteism. How many of you would agree with that? How many of you have seen it? Majority. But there are many of you who are probably not aware. The reason I share this is, yes, while the current Prime Minister had spoken about each MP adopting a village, now I was in the process of, I got to see the change of government. I was still the sarpanch when the government changed and when this had been announced. So I reached out to the MP and I told him this is low-hanging fruit because we had already done provided the basic infrastructure development. And I said, it's not about me. It's about showcasing that a model village is possible. So why don't you adopt us? And he turned around, he said, no, I can't. And eventually he went ahead and adopted the panchayat where the sarpanch was of the same caste as him. I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying this is what happens. Bureaucracy also falls into the same trap. If they are of a particular caste and the sarpanch or the majority of the people living in the panchayat are of the same caste, that panchayat will benefit, but many others would be ruled out. Religion, gender comes later. So these kind of fractions that exist in our society, we have to overcome those. And that can only happen when each one of us takes the call, makes the pledge that we will get out of this discrimination that we within our society carry forward at so many levels. Region-wise, we have the discrimination. Why? Are we not living in the same country? Are we not breathing the same air, drinking the same water? What stops us from seeing each other as human beings is the question. And I'm not saying pay complete disregard to where you come from or what your ethnicity is. All I'm saying is restrict it within the spaces of your own home. Value it there. But once you step out of the space of your house, we have to learn to see each other as human beings first. If we can do that, our country would be far and way, way ahead than what it is today. Thank you. So yes, my path of 9 years now hasn't really been that easy, but it's been a beautiful journey. I have been physically assaulted as well, because yes, when you're bringing about change and you question the system will try, and it's anywhere, I'm not talking about the government, it's human nature, it can happen in the private sector as well. So it does try and push you back. But I think when we believe in ourselves, when we believe in what we stand for and what our vision is, eventually the world conspires. And if you were to ask me that if, in spite of the kind of challenges that I've had, because my very first project itself got stalled, which was the need of the central government, and that's the photograph that I showed you in the previous slide. Over here, this was a building that was required to be constructed in every panchayat. Mine would have been the first one, perhaps across the country, that would have seen completion. We started this work, the building would have been complete in August of 2010 itself. I was elected on 4th of February 2010. But the local polity, or those who were insecure, and the grassroots bureaucracy worked hand in gloves, manipulated land records, stalled that very first project of mine, thinking that that would dishearten me and I would run away. I didn't, because I had multiple other projects to work on. So I said, fine, while my very first project is stalled, I have many others to work upon, and I continue to do so without losing focus on this first one. It took me 4 years, but eventually, the very documentation that had been manipulated was revised, and the stay had been vacated, and we finished the building, which is, as of today, used for many interventions through the government and the private sector to empower the individuals, and that's the building that you see there. It took me 4 years, but I think in a country like ours, what really works is patience and perseverance. And I'm glad that I am able to do that. And what keeps me going is children like Maya, who I believe in our country, it is important that we give respect and a life of dignity to every individual, especially children who I think should be allowed to be children first. Because the difference between a child in the village or in the slums in the urban sector and your child is not that one is weaker than the other. It's just a question of opportunity. Do those opportunities exist in villages? Unfortunately, they do not. And unfortunately, the definition of power for many is one where they believe it can continue only if we make the rest of the society dependent. But that is wrong. That is not the vision, because when you're a parent, you're looking at empowering your child. And I think as leaders within the organization, the private sector, or the PSU, or the government, if we can understand that being a leader is the same as being a parent, we will be doing far more justice to the people that we're working for and that we're working with. And I do believe the world conspires to work with you. And what I'm sharing with you here is a girls' college which was going to shut down. It had been running for, I think, about 10 to 12 years. And it's just been about 2 years that my parents had decided to take it over because it had about 350 girls. And had this college shut down, the women who had come this far with great difficulty would have been shattered. Their hopes would have been shattered. And the vision we had in taking this over, even though none of us come from the field of education, but the purpose we've done this is because this essentially caters to a bachelor's in education and diploma in elementary education. Programs which certifies women to become teachers. And we believe that we can add value to these young women, empower them in the true sense. Then they would have the ability to empower many more within the village where they were born and the villages they're going to get married into. And for the few who actually go on to becoming teachers, just imagine the number of, or the many generations that they could impact if they are empowered. So when my tenure ends, my work in the village will still continue through this college. And I'm hoping many of you would join us in that attempt to change the face of rural India, and not just rural India, but the entire country. And with that, I thank you.